Coming up next, the Bookening reads Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls. Welcome to the Bookening. My name is Nathan Albertson. I'm your humble and obedient host. I'm joined by Jacob Menzel, the pastor who's master of reading. Hey, Jake, how's it going?
It is going well.
I'm also joined by Brandon Chastain, the PhD, ABD. How you doing, Brandon?
Great.
I'm glad to hear it. Today we're going to discuss Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls.
Bong. That's what you were asking for.
Maybe we'll even find out for whom the bell tolls. Brandon, any theories on For Whom the Bell Tolls?
Tolls for you.
For me?
Isn't that right? And for you, listener.
I think it does toll for me, because the one thing that I always say about myself is that I am involved in mankind.
No man is an island entire to himself.
Therefore, I never send to know for whom the bell tolls.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, it tolls for me. Well, shall we talk about Maria?
What is there to say about Maria?
How do you solve a problem like Maria? How do you catch a cloud and pin it down? How do you find a word that means Maria?
Wish fulfillment?
Sexist stereotype?
Clown?
Anything you know you'd like to tell her.
Stop it!
Like, don't have sex with guys that you've just met. But how do you make her stay? And listen to what you say. How do you solve a problem like Maria, fellas? Feminists hate her. Christians are uneasy about her. I'm guessing I was uneasy about her.
Yeah.
How did you guys... Let me just lay it out there. You can say what you want. How did you guys feel about Maria?
No, I thought she was perfect. If I could write a woman, I'd write her just like Maria.
She was sweet and vulnerable and completely devoted and...
Possibly mentally retarded?
Possibly,
yeah.
Yeah. Certainly stunted. Not a whole person.
Well, the obvious criticism of Maria is that she is the wish fulfillment character of an oversexed, undersatisfied, bullfighting misogynist. Did you feel like that's what she was?
Say that again?
Let me read from my notes.
Wish fulfillment of a...
The wish fulfillment character of an oversexed, undersatisfied misogynist.
Huh. Seems feasible. Yeah, actually.
I kind of buy that, yeah.
Next question, please.
I sort of feel like Maria is just a vehicle for the romance of the moment. I question whether or not Hemingway knows who Maria is.
It is true that when you're thunderstruck by love, you can read somebody as being that. It may well be that Maria, if you want to defend Hemingway a little bit, you could say maybe Maria has all kinds of nuance that Robert Jordan's just simply incapable, maybe too selfish to notice. Mm-hmm. And so he just simply sees her as this sweet, submissive, willing kind of thing, which obviously if they got married and moved to Montana, he'd probably quickly figure out that she wasn't.
Okay.
But I don't know.
So you think the novel is pretty much Jordan's perspective then? Robert Jordan, well, that's another. There's no omniscience at all involved.
There's a weird. I found it very weird that it would sometimes jump out of Robert Jordan's perspective.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Is that
sort of.
Well,
you get Anselmo's perspective. You get perspectives that you wouldn't have.
It would be weird. Like Robert Jordan would be walking out of a cave, and you'd expect to follow him, but suddenly you'd just get a couple lines of what Pilar was thinking, and I did that felt weird to me. I wasn't sure what to make of it.
You get the scenes where Anselmo's by himself, right? The one scene where he's waiting in the snow and he's not going to leave. That's not from Jordan's perspective. Right. So,
but
the question is, I do think it's a lot of third-person narrative going on here in the sense that you don't get a lot of the omniscience of the narrator as you do, for example, with Pride and Prejudice or with Steinbeck.
Right.
So then the way to really answer the question is to think through the novel. Does Hemingway ever appear? And if he does, how does he present Maria? Or is it all from Robert Jordan and other people's perspective?
Hemingway doesn't appear in the same sense that Steinbeck just says, hey, I'm going to tell you about the thighs of women's clutches now because you know.
I think it would be the clutches.
Thighs of women's clutches.
Whatever.
Earlier you had a cavalry running through the woods. Yes.
I always mess that up. The hill is
cavalry,
and the thing is
cavalry.
Yeah, you'll hear me do that again.
So
is there anybody else in the novel that simply functions as a symbol or as a...
Can you think back on your life and recognize a Maria somewhere?
Yeah, I was quickly disillusioned about multiple Marias in my life.
That's the way that I think about Maria too. I think of... That's why I said what I exactly. That's why I said what I said about her being a vehicle for Jordan's romance. Those moments, because I think there are lots of girls, and the farther back I go, the younger I get, the more Maria-ish my memories of different girls become. Mm-hmm. Really, that's part of why I said earlier that, you know, a lot of this just really feels immature to me.
Do you think that Hemingway's being mature, or he's portraying an immature character?
His view of romance and love is immature.
You think Hemingway is
absolutely? I think he's immature.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Because you don't get the sense that he's criticizing Robert Jordan for this.
No, he thinks it's La Gloria.
Yeah.
Right? And honestly, it takes me back to middle school romances. It takes me back to my first kiss. Right. Mm-hmm. You know, it takes me back to the...
Where did the noses go?
Yeah, it takes me back to the middle school dance. It takes me back to the party. Yep. On Halloween, when you were 14 or 13, you got to go to a party and be there with girls, and who knows what would happen. I go back to dances. I go back to those kinds of moments, first week of college, romances, all of that sort of thing. That's what these 4 days in the life of Robert Jordan remind me of. Mm-hmm. And it's not a happy thing, not for me. I mean, in the moment, it's...
I can understand how Robert Jordan could be over the moon.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. But yeah, I think we've all been there.
They survived. Maybe it was best that it ended when it did, you know?
I think we've all been there, but to live your life romanticizing that.
And it is the most dangerous thing, I think, for especially a young person that would read this book, is to be taught by Hemingway to romanticize this.
Well, yeah, that's where you get the sexual revolution. If that's what you're looking for, that doesn't last. That doesn't make for a good marriage.
If we're to believe, if we're going to try and draw a realistic psychological portrait of Maria based on what we have, the only way I can understand her is as someone that was just completely damaged by seeing her parents die, by being gang raped, and now doing the opposite of what she should be doing. She's numbing her pain by... I mean, I don't think this is what Hemingway was trying to say, but if I was to try and make sense of Maria as a person that would actually do these things, the only way I could understand her is as a incredibly broken... Needy, not someone to be idealized.
Who needs security and finds somebody that she's told she can trust by a woman that she trusts.
Yeah,
and so latches on to him.
And things like her, I don't know how explicit we want to be, but things like her being too sore but still offering to take care of him are just like, honey, you're broken.
Some of Hemingway's reality pops through there when one of the scenes where you'd mentioned like that, and then where she says no, not this time, and then Robert Jordan says okay and acts like he's happy, but actually secretly he's disappointed.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and he has what I take to be a fake. Oh, but you're sore. Yeah. Oh, please.
Oh yeah.
You woke her up kissing her.
I don't. Yeah.
Like.
Yeah.
Whatever. And she's like, no.
And there's some similarities there with his running to drink and absinthe. These are things that there's this scene right after he thinks about his father. And he forgives his father. He says he understood his father and he forgave him everything and he pitied him, but he was ashamed of him. And then he says, you better not think at all, he told himself. Soon you will be with Maria and you won't have to think. That's the best way now that everything has worked out. And so Maria acts as this outlet for him so he doesn't have to think.
And he really...
he uses her.
And he's pretty... I mean, the amount of himself that he doesn't give her was striking to me. Yeah. The amount that she's not allowed to enter into any of his...
Well, that's the thing. It's all romance and there's no friendship even. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the reality that at the end of the day, they're never going to be friends. And so, well, maybe that's the wrong thing to say.
I don't see their marriage lasting, or at least if they do, it would totally be the grace of God in spite of all the stupid things that they've done.
There's a movie called Shenandoah, This is
Jimmy Stewart movie, right?
It's a Jimmy Stewart movie, and it's Civil War time, whatever. There's a couple scenes where a man comes to propose to or ask for his daughter's hand or whatever, and he asks if he likes her, and he says, well, I love her. He said, I didn't ask you that. Do you like her? And what he's trying to do is bring reality to bear on the romance and say, listen, whatever you think is love, you better like this girl. You better be friends with her. Yeah. You better actually like being around her, because the romance that you feel, it's not always going to be there the way that it is now in this sort of innocent young puppy lovish stage. A romance can deepen and mature over time, and it does in marriage. But there's got to be more than just this kind of pure windswept romance that Robert Jordan and Maria have.
Because the one scene that troubles me is that scene where she's trying to talk about the future they might have together. And he's kind of toying with her. He's like, well, what if you don't have socks? What if we don't have whatever, this and that and that? Then what? And she's like, well, I guess we'll just, what did she say, make love? And,
right.
Yeah. He's like, okay.
Oh, thanks.
It's good.
Well, so you do see these relationships. Probably we've all been on the outside looking in, where a guy like is Robert Jordaning some pretty young girl who's just immature enough to let him.
Did you say Wickeming? Because that's what I...
Yeah, basically.
That's what you heard. Yeah.
And it's pathetic, and you end up despising the guy as just being a total user, which is all that Robert Jordan really is.
Yeah, he doesn't think he is, though.
No.
He thinks that there's something real going on, and they have some kind of deep connection.
Maybe Papa Hemingway thinks so, too, but...
Well, Papa Hemingway also went through, four or five marriages?
4 or 5 wives, so multiple affairs.
He was a bullfighter. Everything for him was...
Catharsis.
Yeah, catharsis. It has to be the intent. That's one of the things about what he likes in the Spaniards. Right? He likes this intensity. He sees this real...
You love them, you hate them. They're either dastardly, hateable villains, and then the next moment they're the most kind and hospitable and sweet people that you'll meet.
And so, always in the back of this is the threat of death, the reality that they're all likely going to die. And Robert Jordan is trying to find different ways to get out of thinking about it. And he has various methods to do it. He has his drink, he has Maria. And then in the chapter where he's thinking about his father, a lot of these things come out. There's that scene where he's thinking about the gun, and he says, you got to stop and think, remember. And he says, just remember something concrete. And that's all you have to do is just remember something concrete. And so that's what happens even at the end when he's dying, or about to die, is he tries and remember concrete things, and he says, remember this, but he says, I can't. And he says, remember water. And he says, okay, yeah, water. It'll be like water. And then he's like, no, you're lying to yourself.
It's interesting that Hemingway does have to make it a virtue to avoid thinking about death. Here he is trying to deal with mortality. The whole book is death and sex, and mostly death. And he's got to, throughout the whole course of the book, justify not thinking about death as a noble thing somehow, avoiding actually facing it as a noble thing, while having already having faced it in the philosophical sense, and then decided I'm not going to be ruled by the fear of it. But the way that I'm not going to be ruled by the fear of it is absinthe and Maria, which is everybody's life.
Right.
We're ruled by the fear of death, and we fill our lives up with distractions. The fact is, people are listening to this podcast right now in the car because in some cases, they just can't stand the silence. And so every moment of your life, you're filling it up. We're getting really meta right here, but every moment in your life, you're filling it up from the moment you wake up to the time you go to bed with noise that keeps you from facing the reality of death. Music comes on with the alarm clock. You step into the car and it's more music or it's a podcast. You get home, it's food, it's drink, it's TV, whatever it is. And then you crash and then you do it all again. And it's all a conspiracy that we play with ourselves to keep us from facing the fact that death is real. We're going to die. We're going to face God's judgment. And for Hemingway to take that and turn it into some kind of noble thing because it's in service of some greater purpose that everybody can acknowledge is meaningless is just wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Preach it.
Amen.
So stop listening to this podcast, man. Go live life. Touch some pine needles.
Oh, yeah. But even that, in the sense of, I was just thinking how it fits also with this other undercurrent of Robert Jordan being the guy who knows the truth. Because there's some sense that there's something special about Robert Jordan.
Right.
Like Karakov, this guy, he says, "It is why I bother with you," he said. "I think you write about absolutely truly, and that is very rare. So I would like you to know some things." Right.
Right.
There's this Yoda.
Right.
What's this truth that he's getting at, and what's this truth that he knows?
The fact is, in Hemingway, there is nothing after death. We are all going to lose. The only question is whether you lose gracefully or not. And what a small worldview that is. I mean, how I do not understand how you couldn't end your life by shooting yourself like Hemingway did. If you thought that there was nothing after, and if you thought that the best we could do is be graceful under the pressure of playing a pointless game that we will lose.
But that somehow writing and art can help you at least be aware of it so that you can do it better.
Sure worked for him, didn't it?
Yeah, so you can fornicate better and you can fight bulls better. I didn't. That's the only sense I can make of the ending, that it is a big circle. Right? You get to the end, he could feel his heart beating against the pine needle floor of the forest, and then you start over again with, he lay flat on the brown pine needle floor of the forest, his chin on his folded arms. Right? So it's a big circle. And what I'm hearing is that Hemingway, the prophet, has now told you it's how you can understand life through these moments of intensity and all this. And that after you get to the ending, it's like that. Did you ever see the M. Night Shyamalan movie, The Lady in the Water?
Yes.
Where it's all about how wonderful the writer is, and how the critic.
The writer is actually played by M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah, and how the writer is the prophet of truth.
Right.
However vague that truth might be. I mean, it's just, in some sense, Hemingway's just offering you a gussied up version of that. You know?
Well, I often find that I can enter into this kind of thing, that I can really be seduced by it. Yeah. And interestingly enough, I didn't feel myself being seduced this time. Maybe it just comes with age and wisdom and experience and godliness, I hope. But I did not find this book to be very seductive. When Hemingway is saying, there is only now, there's only now, there's only now, I was just thinking, no. You know, that I can't think that. I can see the future. I can see the past. I have a soul that strives within me that sees both, and I have to make sense of it some way. I cannot drink myself into forgetting the reality of who I am and only looking at the now. It's just not possible. I can be really depressed and think that the future and the past and the now suck, but the one thing I can't do is pretend like they don't exist, confine it all to experience and to pleasure and to some self-made meaning through art and experience. It just doesn't work. It's stupid.
And you see where it leads. I can think of people I went to college with that are living the Hemingway dream, and it's taken them nowhere.
Well, it's always very sexy when you're young. When you're 20, 30, you can make something like this look sexy, but you have to look at the...
Eventually you look like Woody Allen.
Right, exactly. Woody Allen was funny when he was 20. He's not so funny anymore.
Well, it is the iceberg. And so those scenes that you're referencing, the now scenes, they really are a good test of what's beneath the surface there, because he's showing you the tip of the iceberg, and you're going to be seduced or taken by it, either by how much you deep down actually long for what he's showing you, or it's going to take you back to some place, some past experience or whatever that's going to sucker punch you and pull you away. But the way that he writes it really is, it depends on what you bring to it, with your past experiences and with the current state of your heart at the moment that you read it.
Yeah, and it was striking how differently I felt about it. I was very swept up by this book when I read it in my early 20s, and I still enjoyed it this time, but I did not find it to be half as meaningful as I remembered it.
Yeah, I wanted to be overwhelmed by it, but I was underwhelmed, and I wasn't quite sure if that was because I had such high expectations or because it was just underwhelming. But I think a lot of the writing was very, very impressive.
Well, it's interesting to compare this to Steinbeck, where a lot of his writing is crap.
Yeah.
And the story that he's telling is
so much more moving and compelling.
Mm-hmm.
And full of real meaning about life.
Yeah.
Well, it's because he's willing to actually have thoughts about life beyond just
painting a picture of a scene.
And then it having this meaning that's supposed to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you get it, maybe you don't.
Well, make your own meaning of it.
Right.
Yeah.
What this book felt like to me, as much as anything, was a collection of short stories. The short story of that amazing affair we had on the forest floor, the short story of El Sordo's Last Stand, the short story of
Pablo in the Village,
the short story of Robert Jordan's death at the bridge. And each one of those stories was fantastic, but did they really add up to much of anything? I don't know.
Honestly, if we're going to go there now, I think the two things to take from this book are don't listen to Hemingway. Well, three things. Don't listen to Hemingway about sex or life or the meaning of life. If you want to face your own mortality and process or try to process facing mortality, this is kind of okay. A kind of okay way to do it. Not the best, but a kind of okay way to do it. And if you want to learn how to write like a master, then
this is the place to start.
Mm-hmm.
Because he sure is a master craftsman. He's not a master of
philosophy or theology.
of anything. He's not a master of romance and sexuality and relationships the way that Jane Austen is. He's not a master of what motivates you deep down, like Steinbeck is. He's not a storyteller like Steinbeck, but he is a storyteller in a really fantastic sort of way.
Well, Steinbeck is a biblical storyteller. Steinbeck gives you a whole picture of a history of a certain group of people. Hemingway doesn't do that. He gives you cinematic scenes. This is the first book that I've really felt like it was competing with images from movies in my head. You know, the battle scenes made me think of things from Apocalypse Now or from different movies, and I thought, gee, did the movie do it better? Or I could actually stack them up against each other in a way that I couldn't with Steinbeck, because it's really this book is very cinematic.
Cinematic is a very good way to think about it, and it gives you about the depth of the cinema too.
Yeah. Historically, it was right at the time cinema was coming in to vogue. So they do a lot of the same things, and part of it's intentional. Trying to get meaning from art just through a story divorced from any preaching or exposition from the storyteller. They were tired of that sort of nonsense, and so a lot of them they would look down on Steinbeck. They all thought he didn't deserve the Nobel Prize when he won it. When they do exposit, it's esoteric and doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so philosophy quickly stopped making any sense.
If we had been reading Hemingway in the 1940s, would we get more out of Hemingway taking Hemingway in context as opposed to the more we're reading Hemingway 75 years down the line.
Yeah.
And so we've got so much has happened in philosophy and the arts that I don't know. I don't even know what I'm trying to ask.
You're asking how new was this? Like, would it have been?
I'm asking if would I bring more to it, or I don't know what I'm asking.
Well, when was this book published? This was published in
1940.
One thing that you would bring to it, I think, is you'd feel some of the existential dread of war, because World War II wouldn't have been won yet. The Spanish War would have just been lost, I think, or maybe still in its death throes. So you would feel this kind of. I think the book would be more, the whole idea of grace under pressure, of how to act, would be very visceral to you in a way that it's simply not. You would know people from your town that died fighting overseas, or maybe you would be overseas fighting. We entered the war, 41, a year after this book, wasn't it 41? So I think you'd feel it in your guts in a way that we just don't have any context for.
Yeah, war is divorced from us in a way that it wasn't for the people at this time. You can't just pack up your bags and go fight against ISIS, right? That's not allowed. But yeah, so I think there would be that element to it. It would be more visceral, like you said. And also there would be depending on who you were, there would be the excitement of somebody doing something new. This would be a different style.
Well, I think it's safe to say that every book that's come after Hemingway has been influenced by his writing style. Yeah. You read a popular novel today, it reads a little bit like Diet Hemingway.
Yeah.
And so there's a whole literature, both the literature of enlightenment and of the literature of entertainment, was all much more verbose. And
No, he changed literary style. A lot came out of the 20s and the 30s with what those people did with language. It was a lot similar, for example, to the Elizabethan period, where a lot changed for better and worse.
I think maybe when I was asking my question, I was thinking about a conversation that you and I had probably months ago about...
That's Nathan and Jake, dear listener.
Yes, a conversation that Nathan and I had a couple months ago about Jane Austen's expository style and how, she was able to process things on such a precise and minute level. And you get the sense that people in general were able to do that for themselves more, so that, it sufficed for Hemingway to leave hints because people could think those hints out for themselves.
Okay.
They could follow those trails. They could follow those trains. But now, so far down the line, when we did the Pride and Prejudice episode, I can't tell you how many people I talked to that were just blown away. Like, they read Austen for the first time and were like, who thinks like this about themselves or anybody else? I don't understand. It's teaching me how to think about myself and how to understand myself. That level of introspection isn't commonplace. And so you take the absence of that level of introspection and you bring it to Hemingway, and what are you supposed to do with that?
Yeah, because his whole iceberg principle is assuming that, like you said, that his reader would be able to fill in the gaps, would be able to build from that story and get at this truth with quotation marks around it. And so what you're saying is, like you were saying earlier, with all the music and all the Facebook and all the world around us, that kind of has deadened any attempt to engage introspection. Well, what happens to Hemingway, it just becomes a flat story with no storyteller to guide you through it. When maybe with Hemingway, and I think you're right, the intention is that it would build and it would leave you pondering and meditating. Because, you give this to your average young person today, are they going to leave the book trying to tie it together with a John Donne quote, for example? Like, what in the world does that mean? Why start out with John Donne? If it really is just simply about, living in the moment, then why have that Donne quote open it up, right? So there's supposed to be some meditation involved, like thinking about what these deaths mean and what they mean in relation to you as the reader.
Just the fact that Hemingway had read Donne's Meditations shows a level of insight, understanding, and ability to just comprehend life and think with the great thinkers of all the ages that a lot of people don't engage with now.
Yeah, and so and I think you're right about it kind of being more vignettes than it actually is a coherent one story. And so the prime example of it is Pilar's story about the murders in the village. And so I think each story kind of deals with this question of death, and I don't know, it's almost like variations on a theme.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
So your question is, are people too emotionally dead and dumb nowadays to read it?
Not us, obviously.
I didn't know that was my question, but maybe that was the question.
I think there is some death of... You both have the death of imagination and you have the idolizing of the cheap version of it, right? So, with like Tim Burton.
Right. I wasn't trying to be lame and say as Beyonce's Lemonade made it impossible for us to really get Hemingway.
Right. I know.
But the answer is yes.
Beyonce's Lemonade.
Oh boy, I can't believe we just name dropped Beyonce's Lemonade.
It's what everybody's talking about, isn't it?
Come for whom the bell tolls, stay for the lemonade.
What they were talking about a month or two ago, whenever this goes out.
By the time this comes out. Yeah, people are too dumb. I guess we've already covered this a little bit. This book does have a lot of questionable content in it, and I think it's worth talking a little bit about that. Pride and Prejudice was G. Jungle Book was PG. East of Eden was like a soft PG-13. This book was like a hard PG-13 or maybe a soft R. It's the first book that we've read that's like that. So just generically for people that are reading along with us, I don't know, let's just talk big picture. How do Christians approach questionable content in books just in general? Does anybody want to speak to that?
Well, I guess this falls to me.
Does anybody want to speak to that, Reverend Menzel?
So the Bible doesn't give us a ban list, right? It doesn't give us a...
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, wouldn't it? But the Bible does give us principles, and, there are questions that we have to ask when we come to anything. Is this good? Is this wholesome? Is it profitable? Is it going to, one way or another, help my ability to grow in godliness or to be useful or helpful to God's people or to my neighbor? Is this going to feed my sinful desires? Is this going to be food for the flesh? Is this going to be food for the soul? Whenever we come to anything that's questionable, there has to be a time and place for us to cut off our right hand or to gouge out our eye. There has to be a place where we say no. And that place is left up to us to determine with the wisdom that God gives us.
Well, what I would say about discernment with conservative Christian type people, the kind of people that probably listen to the Bookening, I usually see two sort of equal and opposite errors. One of them is an old person error, generally speaking. One of them is a young person error. The old person error is to draw a completely arbitrary line in the sand and to think that will make them holy, to think that will be sanctifying. So they'll say, we don't read any books that were written before 1900, and two, yeah, we don't watch any R-rated movies.
We only listen to Bach.
The reason that that's obviously bad is because it doesn't actually make you have any discernment. So, yeah, maybe you don't watch any R-rated movies, but then you end up watching every godless, filthy PG-13 rated movie. Maybe you don't.
And feeling good about yourself for it.
And feeling good about it.
Feeling smug about yourself for it.
Maybe you don't read any book written after 1902, and sure, you miss a lot of bad stuff that way, but you also miss a lot of good stuff that way. And as a Christian homeschooler who was kind of in that milieu, I can personally testify that there's a lot of dirty books that were written before 1902. The Marquis de Sade did not come along to give an absolutely extreme example, the Marquis de Sade did not come along after 1902. He wasn't one of the lost generation.
And then there's the flip side to that, which is the young person's error, which
usually sees the old people drawing these arbitrary lines. The arbitrary lines feel oppressive, and they say, I don't want to do that. That's just arbitrary, and it's not leading to godliness. So, yay!
I'm going to understand the culture. I'm going to be able to talk with people at the water cooler. I'm going to be...
Engage in the culture, have a dialogue with the culture, and that just really means I'll be the same as my pagan friends. I just won't draw any lines anywhere, ever.
Yay, I'm free to let all my lusts run free under a principle of Christian liberty.
Right.
It's going to help me understand sin so much better.
Right.
Just like tasting the fruit was going to help Eve understand.
Yeah. Right. Well, it did do that, I guess, but...
Yeah, and it does do that.
And it leads to death.
Yep.
Idiot. What I want to say to the old people, the arbitrary lines is, don't be legalists. That doesn't lead to godliness.
I really like to be the curmudgeon with the young people just because I like to be contrarian that way.
Me too.
And so... to come along and ask if you'd like to watch that with your mom.
Right.
Because everybody resents that question. I resent it, and I resent asking it, and am exactly the kind of person that likes to watch things that I would never want to watch with my mom. Mm. And so if I'm going to live with that discomfort, I'm going to...
Well, the thing that I like to say to young people is, okay, fine. Fight Club is a wonderful evocation of our sinful natures, and it really helps us understand the fatherlessness of our culture. Okay, great. You think that life is short, whatever, But just tell me something, someplace where you drew the line. We can quibble over this or that. Let's agree to disagree. But at least be able to tell me where you suffered for godliness, where you're different than your pagan friends, what you don't watch, what you don't read. Give me a list, Tell me 5 things that came out this year. Tell me about the Quentin Tarantino movie that you didn't go see. Tell me the album that you didn't buy that you would have liked to buy. At least, if you're going to be Mr. Culturally Savvy Christian guy, at least be able to tell me...
Where do you deny yourself?
Where do you deny yourself? And if you can't do that, then all your arguments for why this or that horrible, filthy thing is actually teaching us about our sin just fall flat, and you're a moron, and I don't trust you.
And here's the curmudgeon again. Tell me how much time you spent reading your Bible.
Yeah.
Tell me how much time you've spent reading something that's actually
profitable,
spiritually helpful to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what boundaries and protections are you providing for yourself against the power of these stories? Because whether they want to admit it or not, they can't prevent these things from shaping them.
Mm-hmm. No, right? What goes in comes out.
So if they're going to watch these shows and listen to this music, that its whole purpose that it was created for is to evoke emotion and to make you feel a certain way, and then to shape your view of the world,
your character
out of that. Yeah, your character. It's going to work.
That's what art does.
A good artist is going to do that. You read Hemingway, he's going to shape you.
Mm-hmm. Art is meant to teach you how to think and how to feel about reality, and so one way or another, it's teaching you and inculcating in you.
Yeah. Art is inescapably didactic. There's no such thing as a story without a moral. Yeah. The Cat in the Hat. We don't have to talk about what the Cat in the Hat's moral is.
We're not going to exegete it.
We're not going to exegete it, but
it's there.
It's there.
The moral of the cat.
Anarchist felines will bring destruction with them.
It's as much about how you engage with art, and do you have the strength and the maturity and the discernment to engage with art in an active way? Mm-hmm. Or can you only engage with it in a passive way, and don't fool yourself about it? Recognize when you're being carried along and when you're being manipulated, but be able to engage with everything you touch as a Christian. Don't ever take off your Christian hat. Mm-hmm. Engage Hemingway as a Christian. Engage the Marvel movies as a Christian. Right. Engage Steinbeck as a Christian, and you will learn, and you will grow, and you will be able to figure out, okay, well, what's good about this? What can I take from this that I couldn't get somewhere else, or that I wasn't getting somewhere else? And what do I have to reject? And in rejecting it, how does that teach me how to engage with other people about this sort of thing, who are coming from the same perspective that Hemingway is coming from, or from the same perspective that J.J. Abrams is coming from, or Disney, or whatever. Mm-hmm. Right? The main thing is that, as you said at the beginning, what we all want to do is find our way to turn off discernment. Mm-hmm. Wherever we draw our line, we're drawing lines because we don't want to be discerning. We don't want to engage the world as a 24/7 Christian, and that is not allowed. It is not acceptable. Because you're, as Owen says, you're either killing sin or sin is killing you. Mm-hmm. You're either beating sin in your own life, you're either beating the devil or he's beating you down. There's no neutral zone ever.
Never. The only thing I would add is, to the young Christian man who's listening, there should be stuff, you can take what you just said and you can turn it into, as long as I'm engaging with it in a Christian way, I can
do
just
whatever.
Watch whatever I want, listen to it. And that's often they use the kinds of language that you just used to justify sin. So, just don't watch the movie with the nasty sex scene. Have some lines. I don't care what those lines, I do care what those lines are, but our lines might be a little different. Have some real lines that you don't cross. Have some filmmakers whose work you will not watch, Have some things that if this happens in a movie, I just don't watch it.
You have to be able to say, hey, what is the point of this? Mm-hmm. How is this better than anything else I could be doing right now?
Right.
What is this feeding in me?
And the other important thing that you said, Jake, was live a godly life. Read your Bible. Go to church. Serve in the church. Help people. Get married. Whatever it is.
The more of your life that you spend filling it up with good and wholesome and healthy things, the less time you're going to have.
Right, and your discernment will be sharpened, and you'll lose your appetite for things that are bad, such that, it's the difference between, if I can use myself as a good example, it's the difference between 20-year-old Nathan coming to For Whom the Bell Tolls and 30-year-old Nathan coming For Whom the Bell Tolls. My tastes have actually changed so that something that was seductive about Hemingway no longer is seductive. And you should be able to chart that course in your life if you're doing it right. Not that, I mean, I fail all the time. I don't want to put myself out there as the paragon of virtue. But if you're doing it right, you should be able to look back and see how you've lost your taste for certain things.
Yeah, again, the inner curmudgeon in me wants to say, oh, you want to understand human nature by reading Hemingway. Have you read Romans 1?
Right. Yeah, that's right.
And yeah, there are things that you're going
to... we wouldn't be doing this show if we didn't believe art was great, art was fun, and there were things that you could learn and understand from it.
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to have moments where somebody who's a pagan can open up human nature and explain for you Romans 1 better than you could understand it on your own. That's okay.
We've been telling everybody to read East of Eden since we did our podcast because Steinbeck helps you understand your relationship with your father and your relationship with sin in a way that's helpful and good and moving.
It really matters. The discernment comes out in who you give yourself to as far as the artists go. For example, you were likening Robert Jordan to Wickham, and Hemingway praises a Wickham, while Austen is very discerning in her approach to Wickham.
That's the maturity.
Yeah.
I think it's not wrong to cast Jordan and Maria as Lydia and Wickham.
But the only way you're going to see that is if, as you were saying, you approach it as a Christian and you have a very fierce, analytical, oppositional approach to these authors in the sense that you will appreciate his writing, but you will also not be seduced. Because these writers are very seductive. Right. That's why Hemingway is Hemingway. His philosophy is seductive. Woody Allen is seductive. All these guys, they're seductive. Their philosophies will, can I say it again, seduce you.
Yeah. Well, that's why I love that story of Hemingway pulling that stupid light fixture down on his head, because it's like, this guy's a buffoon.
Yeah. Maybe just being a little autobiographical is helpful, because I come from a place where movies and books and music, they were all that I had. They were everything I gave myself to. And when I became a Christian, I knew I had to die to all of that stuff. And I became a Puritan. Like I threw it all away. And I didn't watch anything for a period of years. And then I said, you know what? That's dumb. And then I slammed right back into the grossness. I can say that the last 5-7 years of my life have really just been trying to strike the balance and figure this.
Well, I think you do go through phases, and one thing I would say is, as much as it's bad to make arbitrary rules, sometimes you can make good arbitrary rules for yourself. There's not a reason that everybody shouldn't watch R-rated movies, or everybody shouldn't read a book written after 1902, or everybody should only listen to a Bach. There may be a reason that you in your life, in order to be godly, need to have a discipline. It's like some people can drink, some people are alcoholics. Some people can't drink a wine cooler without going on a terrible 3-day bender, and those people shouldn't drink. That doesn't mean everybody shouldn't drink.
Right.
There may well be people, I would say, about, if we want to talk more specifically about these books, there may be people, especially young men, that shouldn't read For Whom the Bell Tolls. It might be very seductive for some people. I don't have a problem with us having read it. I don't have a problem with most of our listeners reading it. But listen, if you find yourself seduced by it, if you find yourself warming up to some of this stuff, if you find it drawing you in a way, then have the self-knowledge to know that and throw the book in the trash. It's not worth it. It doesn't matter how great Hemingway was as a stylist.
And then grow up and mature, because everything that's seductive about the romance of these books really is, it's so immature. Yeah. It's so immature. It's so shallow. And you want so much more. And there is so much more. But you're only going to find that if you grow up and you become a man. A real man, not a posturing fake man like Hemingway, but a real man who gets a job and gets a wife and learns how to love and live with a wife.
Crap. You were so one day I'll be a real man.
That is not what I meant.
I know.
It fires me up because I keep going back to my time in college ministry, and all of the guys that I just want to smack in the face. I just want to shove their nose in how shallow this view of relationships is, because they get stuck on it, they get trapped, they get caught up, and they can't get past it. And
it's devastating.
And it ruins their lives.
They throw away wonderful, beautiful, physically beautiful even women because they're not Maria. It's not La Gloria, you know.
Or they spend their days pining after Maria. You know, that one flame, you know, trying to get back to that one fling they had back in high school or whatever. They spend their time living in the past. They spend their time fantasizing about that one moment when the world moved. You know, and it's like, oh, please grow up. Would you grow up?
Yeah.
What were you going to say,
bro? Oh, I'm thinking that they romanticize all this in their head while they're also loving on their computer.
Right.
So, I mean, because you have Robert Jordan.
Right.
Maria's his romance, but also at the same time he's kissing her right after she tells him no. So the visceral lust is going to be there, and you've got to have the discernment to know when to call a spade, and like we were talking off mic
right.
about one of the contemporaries of Hemingway, D.H. Lawrence, who wrote beautifully, but all his work is pornography. And you got to have the discernment not to read D.H. Lawrence. There's absolutely no reason. We won't read D.H. Lawrence on this podcast.
No, somebody listening is going to chafe at that because they're going to say, okay, you said the word pornography. The instant that you do that, you've labeled it as absolutely sinful.
Yeah.
And
chafe at it all you want.
Chafe away.
Like I said, you've got to know
the obscenity in the milk of your chafing.
You've got to know when to call a spade, and I have no issue saying that D.H. Lawrence is pornography. He's artistic, aesthetic, beautiful pornography.
There's well done pornography and there's poorly done pornography.
Yeah, and it's dangerous, and it has destroyed many a grad student.
Yeah.
So just stay away from it and don't use that as an excuse. And you know what? There are other forms of pornography in that maybe you're not with the sex, but then the violence. So you'll defend Tarantino or somebody like that and saying, oh, it's still, you know, it's different.
But he deals with death, man.
Yeah.
Dude, grow up. Join a whaling ship or something. I mean, just like become a trucker. You want to understand how life works. Go live some freaking life.
Throw away your phone and your computer and work with your hands for a little bit.
It's not going to be like a Tarantino movie. I hate to break it to you.
Yeah, I hope not.
It is.
I'm sorry. Listen, if anybody's chafing, if there's any especially young men out there that are chafing at us right now, just stop chafing. I don't even know what that is. It sounds like something you should put lotion on.
You look like get some medication first.
Right. Stop chafing. But the reason that we're so hard on this, we're being hard on ourselves. If that helps
That's the truth.
Know that we've had to repent of an awful lot of this stuff, and we've been seduced by an awful lot of it, and we've seen it be destructive in our lives, all three of us, I think, in different ways.
Yep.
We just want to save you some pain. Maybe we sound a little crusty, but, I mean...
The amount of my life I have spent grasping for this it disgusts me.
Yeah. Anything else we want to say about the questionable content and what is the earth moving? Anybody want to tackle that one?
Endorphins.
Is it just a physical thing?
It's like I was saying before. You take two people, you throw them into an intense situation, and everything's going crazy. And death is a real imminent possibility. And everything around them is spinning, and nothing is stable. And what are they going to do? They're going to latch on to each other, and when they lock eyes with each other, the world's going to spin around them. And I think that that's a reality that many of us can relate to.
Sure.
And it's just that sort of romantic, it's like I said before, it's that first week of college, right? You go away from home for the first time, you're up there, and everything is unfamiliar and everything is spinning, and you need something stable. And that's why so much of first week of college, you have these romances that crop up, and it's really special and really unique, and and then it falls to pieces because that's what it does. It's also
a senior high trip or
a mission trip. It doesn't have to be. It can be prom, right. For goodness sake. It's just something different, something new, and brought together with a lot of pressure and emotional intensity. Prom's sort of that way in the sense that it's the closest thing to sort of faking a wedding, right? You're going to get really dressed up and have this really special moment with this one person for this one night, and maybe you're going to end up in the back of a car or in a hotel room or whatever. It's intense. Those moments are intense.
And Hemingway's not bad, I don't think, about... It's not wrong of Hemingway to emphasize the transcendent feeling that people have, because, boy, do you have that feeling like the
That's
world
right.
stops. And I love how he evokes just it's a very subtle thing that he does, but just Robert Jordan's awareness of where Maria is in the cave, of her retreating, of her coming forward, of her touching his hand. That's so what it feels like when you're in love with, and that the person that you're in love with or infatuated with is in Technicolor. Everything else is black and white. Mm-hmm. He really does a good job.
Now,
of
listen,
that.
there is a place for a lot of what he does evoke. There is a reality there that can be good and clean. And it's what most people would have known as maybe, say, a honeymoon. Right. Like, that's why the honeymooning or the honeymoon phase means anything at all. And there are certainly other points in your life or your marriage, that can have that kind of gravity or that kind of transcendence. And may the Lord bless you with much of it. But
can't be your primary goal in life.
No, if that's your primary goal, then you're going to be like Hemingway, and you're going to be divorced 5 times,
living in Cuba,
and you're never going to have a real relationship, and there's not going to be any real depth to your romance, to your intimacy. It's always going to be that shallow, and you're never going to know exactly how shallow it is, because you're going to be convinced that it's everything, and it's not.
It's one of those weird things about life. If you try to hold on to La Gloria, it slips out of your fingers. If you try to serve God and live your life correctly, you might just get it as a nice little bonus.
Yeah.
Well, I think if the book does anything, it makes you think about death. The death scenes are all really well done, and you do end up thinking a lot about, which one of the guys walking down the line would I be in Pablo's Village Massacre.
That was a good
the ways that he evokes a sense of, you have the final day, the final morning, and at one point he compares it to going to school for the first time.
Great way to make you feel it.
What was interesting is that he was already making me feel that way, and I was trying to figure out, how is it? I know what this feeling is. I can imagine myself on the field of battle going to face almost certain death, but I've never done anything quite like that. And then he brings that analogy in, and it's like, he's evoked something visceral and real that I recognize, and I think he's right.
The most admirable thing about Hemingway is that he does evoke those scenes well, and he does bring a bit of nobility to it. It is inspiring to think that you could handle these things with courage. Now, your courage should come from God, not from Absinthe and Maria. But
yeah,
it's nice to think. I mean, I love that sentence, the world is a fine place and worth the fighting for, and I hate very much to leave it. That's a really noble sentiment, and that's a great Hemingway way to put it. And that's a nice place for Robert Jordan to end his life thinking that thought. And I'd love to end my life thinking that thought. I don't know if that's just a wish fulfillment, and I'll end my life going, this sucks. But,
bone hurts.
Why did it have to be this way? I was so close. I thought it was free.
Does this book get the coveted Bookening seal of approval?
Meh. I could take it or leave it. I'm never going to read it again.
I've read it twice now. When I was 20, it would have gotten like a giant seal of approval. I would have said it was one of my favorite books. We'll each give our own seal of approval. Jake gives it a meh. What do you give it, Brandon?
I'll give it a meh, but with a capital M.
Was that in the positive or negative direction?
That's in the positive direction.
So a meh.
A meh.
A meh.
Yeah. I mean, he gets the capital M because he's such a fantastic writer. His prose is...
Yeah, if you can avoid being seduced by the parts of this book that are seductive, and you're an aspiring writer, man, do you get a lesson in writing from Hemingway.
It's incomparable. You're not going to find anyone who writes as well as him. But, all that said, I've got the same feelings you guys do. This time it didn't do it for me like it used to. And I do think it has to do with maturity. I think he's immature. I think the whole Lost Generation, I keep going back to Woody Allen, but I have somebody in mind that I know that loves Hemingway, loves Woody Allen. And it's that whole refusal to grow into being anything other than a man completely enslaved to the moment and thinking that you're really poetic because of it. Yeah, it's a meh with a little M.
Oh, and you're reducing it.
But all that said, you're not going to find a better prose writer, prose stylist. So if you're a young writer and you're really wanting a teacher, unfortunately a lot of young writers usually don't want teachers. But if you do, good for you. And Hemingway's good.
So I'll give it a meh. I mean, the style is great. I think Jane Austen, we read her, she is a great articulator of thoughts. I think Steinbeck was a great storyteller. Hemingway is the first guy that I'd just say is a great writer, a writer's writer.
That's well put.
A person that writes prose. Now, it turns out that Jane's articulation and Steinbeck's storytelling were much more meaningful to me this go around than Hemingway's style. But Hemingway is a great stylist, and if for no other reason than that, I'd say this book deserves its place in the canon. It's one of those books that if you're not going to be seduced by it, it's worth having read. All right, well, I think we gave For Whom the Bell Tolls its due. Now, Brandon, I noticed that you're still polishing your gun from the Contextual Texan segment.
You see how it's got the deep brown sheen from all the polishing on it? It's a Civil War gun.
Oh, yeah.
My grandfather gave it to me.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Brandon, you've shot Jake.
Oh, no.
Jake, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay. I think the bullet passed right through.
Right through what?
My heart.
No! Jake, why?
It's going dark.
No, Jake, you're going to live. You're going to get better.
Want me to finish him off for you?
No, you idiot. Put those guns away.
It is a far, far better thing I do than I have ever done before.
Dying in your own blood on the studio floor?
Well, now that you put it that way.
Jake, no. I don't know if we can do this podcast without you.
You have to, Nathan. Do it. Do it for the people. The podcast is a fine podcast and worth fighting for. I hate very much to leave it.
I feel like somehow I'm responsible for your death, and especially that Brandon is responsible for your death. How can we go on with the knowledge of how we sinned against you?
Tim Schull.
Oh no! Jake!
No! What have I done?